Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I am Shannon DeRejo from Creamer Media Webinars. It's great to have you with us for part one of our two-part Energy Outlook webinar series, where our expert panel will discuss sustaining everyone and reform momentum. I am Shannon DeRejo from Creamer Media Webinars. Where our expert panel will discuss sustaining reform momentum in South Africa's energy sector. Sustaining reform momentum will be crucial in 2026 to ensure investment flows and long-term energy security in South Africa. This webinar will examine progress in building a more competitive electricity market. This webinar is brought to you with the support of our sponsors, Discovery Green, Standard Bank, Investec, WEG, and TGR Attorneys. We thank them for enabling this important conversation. Before we dive into today's discussion, just a few quick housekeeping notes. You'll find the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please post your questions there at any time. Our panelists will do their best to cover as many as possible during the discussion. The chat is open for your comments and insights, and we encourage you to share your thoughts there. Just remember that questions go in the Q&A while conversations go in the chat. This session is being recorded and we'll share the link with you afterwards. We're also streaming live on YouTube, and that link will be posted in the chat once it's available. So with that, let me introduce today's facilitator, Masedi Tlhong, a director at TGR Attorneys Incorporated. He specializes in competition law, commercial litigation, and regulatory advisory. Masedi has a keen interest in the intersection of competition law and energy policy, a field of critical importance considering the global energy transition. Masedi will be guiding the conversation with our distinguished panel, which includes Nontokozo Hadebe, the Group Executive for Group Strategy and Sustainability at Eskom Holdings; Leoné Human, Chairperson of the South African Independent Power Producers Association; James Mackay, CEO of the Energy Council of South Africa; André Nepgen, the Head of Discovery Green; and Olga Suchkova, Associate Director at Cresco. It's an impressive lineup, and we're looking forward to an engaging discussion. So, Masedi, over to you to lead us through today's conversation.
Yes, thank you, Shannon, and good afternoon to everyone joining us today. We are at a pivotal moment. South Africa's energy landscape is fundamentally transforming. The reform journey set in motion years ago has moved from theory to practice, from policy papers to real projects, from a monopoly to a market. The theme of our discussion is sustaining reform momentum. That focus on sustaining is deliberate. The initial steps have been taken. The unbundling of Eskom is underway. The national transmission company is operational. And a wave of private generation is queuing to occur. But now the hard work begins. The risk in 2026 is not lack of vision, but a slowdown in execution. World grid constraints strangle new investments. Can regulatory certainty keep pace with project timelines? Will the financial and structural models we are building be robust enough to secure long-term energy security and affordability? Our task today is to examine the foundations we've laid and, crucially, to identify the next set of priorities to keep this complex reform process on track. We need to move from a sector in reform to a sector that is reformed, functional, and thriving. I'm privileged to be joined by a panel of exceptional leaders who live these challenges every day. They bring critical perspective of the state, utility, the independent producer, the energy industry body, the corporate off-taker, and independent market analyst. A warm welcome to our panelists. Now, it's only fair that I start with you, Nontokozo. Let's start with the good news. Eskom's improved performance, coupled with reforms, has given us breathing room from load shedding. Now, from inside Eskom, what do you think is the single most important factor to sustain this reform process and ensure it's not only a temporary reprieve?
Thank you so much, and thank you, and welcome to all other panelists as well as the Creamer Media for organizing it, and everyone else who's on the platform. We thank you for the privilege, Masedi, to participate. Now, definitely, we come from quite a long way. Maybe just to start, that what got us here to this point where we can say now, how do we sustain? I think from 2023, just the focus that Eskom from the leadership board, management, and the shareholder had in terms of the discipline of adding additional capacity through Medupi, Kusile, as well as Kuber, which we've seen also coming on stream, was just one of the things that we needed to make sure that it gets us here. The disciplined maintenance of our coal fleet, just to make sure from the reliability, it's also some of the things that got us here, which is why we've seen quite a reduced load shedding and also the improved overall performance on Eskom's financials. To sustain this, we're quite clear. It might not be the single bullet or single most important thing, Masedi. Unfortunately, it's a number of things, but I think the importance is that continuation of a disciplined maintenance. Capacity we have at least to give us the cushion, but what is important now is to continue to just make sure we manage our planned maintenance to avoid for more preventative maintenance of the fleet. Also, just to look at small things that are putting us at risk, like the trips, which is where the teams is focusing on. There's quite a lot of work that is being done for the Eskom employees as well across the organization, just to make sure that we sustain. Even when you look at the investments, they are still biased to that we have a planned focus on planned maintenance for our fleet, and we focus on now more just the reliability on managing the things that trip us, like trips and so on. This is a value chain. There's also work that needs to be done on the distribution side as well. The unit debt, but also the losses because of the theft and all of the things that are happening. All are being done to sustain. But also the period that we are in, it is giving us an opportunity to look at other things in terms of flexible capacity, so that we are even able to balance during the day. There's quite a lot of solar coming in, but at night, how do we bring in that flexibility into the system? Investing in other things like long duration battery storage. So we're doing all of that research that is going to sustain us. But maybe let me stop there for now on that, and quite excited of the journey that we are in and where we go from here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I wanted you to touch on a little bit on the issue of the reforms that are underway, such as the unbundling ones. Do you have anything to say to us about that?
Yes, most definitely, and it is quite a topical topic, for the lack of a better phrase, at this current point in time. And it's been a long journey from when it was published, the unbundling of Eskom, on where we are. We do have to recognize that a structural reform in its nature will take quite a long time, particularly in the context of the challenges that we've had in terms of the energy supply. But we have been able to have a separate NTCSA from 2024. And we've seen now the position that has been communicated by the shareholder of the establishment of the TSO in the form that has been prescribed on the relationship with the NTCSA as well as Eskom, which is well discussed. So I'm not even going to go to that detail, but we can probe if I need to say more about it. The focus now is to bed down the workings of that TSO. You must remember that NTCSA is an interim TSO for the next 5 years. They will act on that until it is fully established and the TSO is completely independent of NTCSA. So the focus is to bed that down now. Good news, December, the market operator license, it was obtained to allow the wholesale market launch, which we are anticipating. That's a big next step. in terms of that space. There's quite a lot of work that is being done, and the other panelists will also touch on it in the preparation of the liberalized market. The other work that is being done, obviously, is now also just to turn the attention to the other divisions, the generation and the distribution, because the unbundling was just not only on the grid side, but also we needed to look at the new business models as well for the distribution, which is what Eskom is busy with as well. I hope that answers you for now.
Yes, that's fine. We'll take it. We'll take it further later. Thank you, Nontokozo. So that's the view from the incumbent. Leoné, from the perspective of the independent power producers waiting to connect, what is the most urgent reform in 2026 to ensure the grid can physically accommodate this new capacity and turn policy into power?
Thank you very much, Masedi. And I think the first thing I can latch onto here is what Nontokozo just said, and it is the cross-cutting need for Eskom to unbundle and get the TSO totally separate, and for Eskom to, or for the TSO, in that sense, to have all the assets under themselves so that they can manage it themselves and actually borrow money against the assets, so that they can also decide who builds the assets, at what speed it's getting built. I think that will create a lot of interest from investors as well, just because a bigger form of trust will be created, because there's no this interdependency with Eskom generation and Eskom transmission, and you don't see, or we won't, as the public eye, see a conflict of interest with that. So I think Nontokozo actually described the plans that they have and what they are doing, especially in the next 5 years, very well. And from the outside, we really want to see this happening. But for the immediate effect, I would like to see it happen much quicker than in the 5 years, for us to see our grid expansion and also the strengthening thereof happening much quicker.
Right. So what do you think the problem might lie, where the problem might lie? Is it the planning, funding, or execution that causes the misalignment between IPP timelines and expansion?
I think it might be a combination of all of them. If you think of the amount of work that needs to be done, the magnitude of the lines, the distances that needs to be built, the environmentals that go with it. Eskom is only so big, and we only have so much skilled technology-orientated people within it as well that can do the specialized work. So I would say we should really take hands as private investors, private contractors with Eskom, and not allow, or not only leave it to Eskom to do it themselves. Eskom should really be able to reach out to independent people as well, and utilize everybody's skills and abilities to fast track this. Otherwise, we might not get there in the time that we require it.
Right. Leoné, you point out to a very critical issue of collaboration between Eskom and IPPs. Olga, from your analytical vantage point at Cresco, looking at the IRP and system dynamics, what are the most important market or policy signals that, if clarified in 2026, would directly unlock the great investment we need? What are investors waiting to see?
In general, it is important to see, I think, to previous point, the general collaboration effort between, all the parties involved and the stakeholders. So from that perspective, having certainty that the grid will be there, having certainty that projects remain bankable. Ultimately, for any type of investor, they just need to be sure that, the projects will be able to initially reach financial close and then get the metrics that they hope to see, right? And the returns that they hope to see. So from that perspective, really seeing that unlocking of the grid is a critical element. And we've been discussing this. I think we've been raising this obviously numerous times. New capacity is needed, is urgently needed in the grids. Last year we did a report together with the Standard Bank, on analyzing the RP and the impact that it would have on a grid. And quite clearly, with the aging coal fleet of Eskom, there is urgency to add that new capacity. And obviously, there are many challenges along that way. But at the same time, we need to make sure that this new capacity does get added to the grid.
So you mentioned a very important thing about certainty, and in most of your reports that I've seen, you often warn of unintended consequences. But one specific concern you've raised is that the tariff design in the new market could entrench incumbents. Could you briefly explain that risk and what the alternative principles should be?
Yeah, so in our view, market, obviously, we believe that the wholesale energy market, looking at the different international benchmarks and basically lessons learned from around the world, unlocks many of the challenges and basically allows you to solve some of the problems that are that we're currently facing. So from that perspective, wholesale energy markets is a very nice platform to resolve some of the issues. But what is important is obviously the design, right? The design of the market is critical to make sure that and I'm going to stress it again and again, I think the project bankability is something that we need to continuously keep in mind. We need to make sure that projects, revenues and cash flows are intact. There are various sources of revenue. Energy sale is not just one source of revenue. There usually are different sources of revenue being offered by a wholesale energy market. So this whole revenue stacking and revenue potential is what really, we would like to see in that new market.
All right, interesting. Andrew, I want to come to you, and Olga is mentioning a very crucial issue about the market design. You are in the business of matching supply with corporate demand, right? Given the grid and market design constraints we've just heard, what market reforms are most critical in 2026 for you to scale your offerings reliably?
Thank you, Masedi, and hi everyone. There's a number of them, but I'll highlight the ones that I think come to mind as one of the strongest ones. So of course, grid access remains a big one, and the acceleration of that. I think that is, as you mentioned earlier, more execution than it is necessarily policy. I think that the big factor to take into account, and I think this will take time, but we should not get distracted and keep at it, because we sort of year 2 in the liberalisation of the market. One thing that we need to understand, especially from the corporate point of view, is that the majority of businesses and individuals and households and everyone in South Africa cannot yet access, wheeled energy, for example. So there's a big part of the market that would like access but can't yet access it. And the reason for those are manyfold. Many reasons for that. I mean, one is many municipalities haven't developed frameworks yet for wheeling, and that is in process. Many municipalities, unfortunately, have not a very good balance sheet in order to, and significant debts to Eskom, so that makes wheeling a little bit locked up as well. And currently, traditional wheeling is only limited to Eskom high voltage and medium voltage on that. So there's a natural sort of throttle on the market, and I think we've yet to fully unlock sort of the potential on this. So if I had to think of the reforms that are needed, I think the focus, and there's work being done on this, but we need to accelerate it, is mechanisms and policies that will give more people access to renewable energy. Those in the municipalities, those with smaller energy users, large energy users. I think by unlocking that, what comes from demand, basically everything flows. Then supply comes, then more generation comes, then more building, more investment, more jobs come. So I do think that is an absolutely critical but very difficult and complex thing actually to solve. So I think that, in my opinion, if I had to say, of all the ones, is the reform needs to address accessibility, balancing fairness and sustainability at the same time.
Yes, okay. You mentioned that. Can I ask you this? What key trend do you see among corporate buyers? In respect of accessibility that you're talking about, is it now about energy resilience and carbon certainty as much as it's about price?
It's interesting. I mean, the narrative's always been there. I mean, it's always price, a balance between the head of ESG and the CFO. Savings versus reduction emissions. It's never, it's never a one size fit all. I mean, price is a big factor. I think in South Africa, what is interesting and a trend that's really come out. I mean, we, as I mentioned earlier, it's year 2. We're really in January of year 2 of the liberalisation of the market, but we're dealing with corporates and businesses, and this is our experience, that are extremely educated and sophisticated around this. I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think over the last, if you just look at the numbers over the last, 2 years or year and a bit since the liberalisation of the market, if you take the last 2 years, just from a private point of view, was over 2 gigawatts of private renewable energy, not, from private to C&I space under construction and being built on that, which is, I think, a good sign for the rest of the market that things are moving and it's being adopted, and there's a positive signal really on that. I think the other big reason why we're seeing so many corporates being so familiar with it and not just tiptoeing into this, but actually embracing it, is the fact that I think South Africa is sort of in a unique position in that over the last few years, many businesses had to become energy experts to some degree, just given the unfortunate consequences of load shedding and the advent of rooftop solar, etc. on that. So there's multiple gigs of rooftop solar on that. So you can almost say that the average business in South Africa is, some of the people there is probably a self-earned PhD in electricity to some degree. And I think that has really resulted in a greater level of urgency amongst the private side to say, listen, we are comfortable now, we are interested now, we want to do it. And then the last factor, which I think is quite interesting, is that there is starting to be a little bit of concern around the ability or the availability of good quality renewables going into the future. I think it relates to the grid point.
Yeah.
I think it relates to all those points where, there is, I think while there's a lot of greenfield projects shooting up, the projects specifically wind that is very attractive is narrowing and becoming more and more rare, and companies are noticing it and moving quickly. So that would be some of the trends that we're seeing on our side.
So tell me, while we're on the question of accessibility, sorry, Andrew, how important is it that these, the connection, or rather the power that's supposed to go to these clients, how important is it that it needs to be near the operations?
So I think there's a familiarity of having it near the operations. I mean, people like to see it, see the panels, see things happening on that. But and even with batteries, that is a partial solution. I don't think there's, yet to see a massive wind turbine in Sandton, for example. So I do think, the combination is always going to be there. The solution, I think it's going to be it's going to be the exception, not the norm, where people are going to only rely on embedded. I think there's going to be a combination that comes out of it. I don't think it has to be on site. I think there's a strong case for not doing that, obviously.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Andrew. Sorry, André. Nontokozo, let me circle back to you. Andrew's clients, they want clean, reliable power, often near the operations. That's why I was asking about that. This speaks to a new role for Eskom as the grid owner and system operator. What role does Eskom see for itself in enabling and integrating this kind of decentralized, private participation, not just generation, but in grid capacity too?
Let me just make sure I got your question correctly. And Masedi, can you repeat that? Apologies.
Yes, sorry. I'm saying what Andrew just mentioned. It speaks to a new role for Eskom. What the new role for Eskom in renewable energy, as the grid owner, but as the grid owner and system operator, what role does Eskom see for itself enabling, integrating this kind of decentralized private participation, and not just generation, but in great capacity too? Where do you see yourself in that space?
Okay. Definitely, I think the threat from all the panelists has been the grid capacity through the execution of TDP, which then is the biggest challenge as it has been highlighted. So that's the first thing that Eskom, obviously through NTCSA, is focusing on. I understand what the panelists have highlighted in terms of the speed and Eskom's capacity to execute. And that's definitely the approach of collaboration so that we can accelerate the capacity. But the work that is being done, even looking at different models, I think what has been done through the ITP, which is led by the minister, will definitely, it's a showcase of how it can be done collaboratively between NTCSA, the private sector, as well as government. So there is that. And also, and we're looking at different models. There are a number of ways to roll out infrastructure, whether it's through build, fund, run, and operate. All of those models, they are very dedicated teams, which the team is also leveraging on other aspects to see how we can accelerate the implementation. There is the first part.
Yes.
We are and even our investment as well. You will see from our investment plan, there's quite a significant ramp up of NTCSA's capital investment from what it was. It's even doubling from what they have been doing over the years, so that we make sure that there's an acceleration of the grid capacity. The second part is we have seen from other parts of the world as well that it's not just rolling out grid capacity, but there are other challenges that are arising from that, because you tapping into the renewables, which are not very intermittent, like your coal or your gas source. So you have to do other things around technology. There is where we have to collaborate across the sector as well on the technologies and investments that bring that stability. Definitely generations, it's one of the areas where there's greater collaboration in bringing in a private sector. We have made it quite clear that we are open for business. We on that aspect through our Eskom Green, because from our side as Eskom as well, there's a big ramp up in terms of the renewables, working with the private sector in terms of Triple P. We can leverage, we're leveraging on our assets. We know private sector has the knowledge and skills in the renewable space, as well as the funding that will bring those into light. Thank you.
Right. Nontokozo, just stay there. I think I got a question from one of the audience members, Peter de Villiers. He's asking, since a virtual wheeling cannot proceed in municipalities that are not in good standing with Eskom, what efforts are currently underway to resolve the structural blockage?
From the municipal debt perspective.
Yes.
And yes, and there's quite a lot, and I must say we're starting to even see some of the gains because our municipal debt is not still an issue, but not increasing as much as we had seen in the previous years. But the biggest thing that we are doing now is the Distribution Agreement Agency, the DAA, where because we've seen that if you take the traditional route of collections, customer collections, and other means, maybe we are not addressing, we're just addressing the symptoms, not the root cause.
So
the DAA it just allows us to partner much better with the municipalities to see what are the issues at hand and where in our collaboration we can assist. Is it an infrastructure issue, because we are also faced with the same issues of theft and vandalism, and what are the deeper issues that the municipalities are experiencing, which will help with that side. And there's been a great collaboration between National Treasury and our shareholder through some regulations and guidelines and policy frameworks to implement the DAA. So we are confident that we'll see quite a lot of uptake of the signing of the DAAs, but there's quite a lot of work happening between ourselves and the municipalities in this regard. Having said that, there are also other alternatives that we are looking at the microgrids, and to reach the key customers, which is even perfect for the renewables, even reaching those communities that don't have electricity as yet, let alone the type of electricity. So that we also have to push, and also working with other participants. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Thanks for that, Nontokozo. James, we've heard from the utility, producer, the analyst, and the buyer. From the Energy Council's overarching view, what are the top 2 policy or regulatory decisions that must be taken in 2026 to align all these moving parts and sustain momentum?
Well, thanks, and greetings to everyone. I think before we just dive into sort of the technical decision making, there's important context that I think people just need to have, and that is this has been a very complex but rapid reform program born out of a very deep crisis, started in really 23 through business and government, and that focused on energy, solving load shedding, transport, logistics, and crime and corruption, which we won't cover. But really, it was a very centralized control system under NECOM, joint sort of resources being pulled together from public and private sector very rapidly, and decisions were made very quickly. So was the recovery from the crisis in terms of shedding, as phase 2 of that engagement and partnership moved into design work. A huge amount of work was done under the NECOM structures. Again, a lot of joint resourcing, and again, naturally tending towards centralized control, guiding these reform steps. We've now, and we had the phase 3 or agreement and kickoff meeting with the president and relevant ministers in business yesterday at the union buildings. And phase 3 is now about implementation. So the theme of phase 3 is inclusive growth, jobs, and confidence. And so we can see we're moving out of crisis. There's been rapid shift, and we're moving away from centralized control, because now it's actually about implementation. And so I think this is where there's a lot of anxiety by listeners and people generally in the public domain, because we don't have good trust in Eskom and public sector and government for good reasons, because we've had 10 to 15 years of constant decline and uncertainty, and so that still is weighing on the system, and it will take time for that to come right, although we see the green shoots are coming through. So when we now look at implementation, and I think this is where, again, the minister and the president yesterday also very firm and said, we remain committed to the reform agenda. It's irreversible. We're moving forward. But I think an important point that the president raised, and he said, particularly on this TSO thing, it's complex. It's going to take a long time. It needs to be phased. We need to push the grid, expand the grid, invest in the grid that needs private sector. But we also need a sustainable Eskom, financially sound Eskom. And if we lose either of those, we lose a major underpin to the reform program. So again, I think that the messaging was around, we need to build transparency and confidence. Policy is the directive of the ministry and of government, not of business and private sector. However, I think, so we can't always have consensus around policy, but what we can have is clarity, confidence of the roadmaps and decision-making, transparency of how and what work is being done to do this. So I think that context is settling, and we've seen, I think, a lot of political shifting and statements being made over the last couple of months, shifting from last year into this year. But there's a lot more confidence and settlement, and I think very firm commitment to engage on these issues across the board. So when it comes to 2026, we've certainly, and this is also agreement, with the ministry as well as with the umbrella kind of business for South Africa group, and the push in more broad terms, is that we have to now focus on sustaining the reforms and embedding them, ensuring cost competitiveness of electricity going forward, and then avoiding future load shedding. Those all sound very simple and intuitive, but there are many risks with those and a lot of complexity. The key elements that we've got to look at now is grid. And I think there's a difference between long-term grid planning, ITPs, transparency, TSO, the CG, the credit guarantee vehicles, etc. Those are going to take time, and they will start materializing, I think, towards later this decade into the early 30s for the big upgrades. We have a very urgent position now that there isn't grid available. At the moment, we're seeing investment, financial close decision on renewables peaked in 24. We in a robust construction phase, but investment decision-making is declining. I think the banks are sitting restless and are wanting more work. In 2024, they all had bloodshot eyes and were not sleeping. Okay, so we need to get back up and running with the financial close process. Otherwise, by 2029, and this is an important point, demand has continued to decline for the last 12 years. And from last year into this year, we still saw demand decline. So getting out of load shedding is not just fleet sustainability and reliability of Eskom, it is declining demand, which is exactly against the one common objective that everyone in this country must have, is inclusive economic growth to create jobs. And you have to see demand growth in the electricity sector to realize the ambition of 3 to 5% GDP growth, which is what we have to do to create jobs. So we've viewed and estimated that you need 16 to 20 terawatt hours of demand bounce back before 2030. If we are to see that now in the current trajectories, we're back in load shedding. So we are not seeing investment that is sustaining a robust renewables industry. It's not meeting the targets of the IRP, and we're not building enough new generation to deal with this shift. So if there's one thing that we've got to do, we've got to urgently, more urgently than the long-term plan, we have to find short-term solutions to unlock grid. I think that there are issues that we can do. Curtailment, there's other sort of unlocks, self-build in the collector grids by private sector, but those things are super urgent. And then I think that the other things that we've really got to start now is the market launch. It's complex, but it is central to the whole decentralization, stability, commercial understanding, price discovery, investor confidence. It's so many touch points that we must see the market launch, because it is going to take time to build confidence and get price discovery. So I think those are the elements that we've got to push around reform being embedded. But a big concern at the moment is price trajectory and affordability. And we see this coming through in the low-income household, sort of where the minister has pushed for higher FBE to protect that. We've seen it coming in the smelter industry, where there's a kind of commitment to create a pricing agreement. Who's going to pay for these subsidies? How is the system going to pay for it? At a time when there's still a lot of inefficiencies in the system that need to come out. And this is again talks to the unbundling, not just of the TSO, which is forward-looking, but how do we deal, and Nontokozo has made the point, with GX, DX, how do we get the efficiencies out? How do we, GX carries all the sort of toxic assets, so to speak. DX carries a lot of municipal debt, and that's where a lot of inefficiencies are embedded. So if we want to see affordability, we want to see system prices coming down, we have to deal with Eskom restructuring, Eskom inefficiencies, and these type of issues, which we'll talk to local government. And then we must build grid with a lot more urgency. Thanks.
All right, I appreciate that. You've long monitored the unbundling of the NTSA and the establishment of the NTSA. And based on what we've heard today, you think we're on track, James? And what do you think is the single biggest political risk to delivering these structural reforms this year?
I don't think one can talk it on track because there are different lenses. And we heard, Leoné comes from an IPP perspective, which is a lens that says we want to connect as much projects as possible because that's our business and that's how we make money. Olga spoke from an investor perspective. They say we want to unlock investment and capital structuring into transmission expansion. So those are very valid. Those are important. And I think what has come through now is and the minister said this yesterday, how do we make sure that we have a very stable systems view? What is a confident and robust phased approach? The end game, and the president made it very clear as well, is ultimately the TSO must be completely independent. That's, a quote. However, how do we get from here to there in the timeframes that works for all parties? We need to keep Eskom sound, sustainable. We can't afford to see a financial sort of breakdown on the Eskom side, but we also need to prioritize investment into transmission. So I think the media articles and the sort of the flurry of activity around the TSO has actually been very positive, because it's highlighted where perspectives are valid but not balanced with what are some of the other lenses. And really what's come out is that there's a very common view that we have to unbundle. We've got to try and do this as quickly as possible that protects all of the system and all interests. Now we've got to find middle ground, is what is the best route to implementation? Is it phased? Is it splitting of assets? And I think that work is yet to be done. And then, we'll see the confidence and transparency of a better planned roadmap, rather than, different perspectives of what self-interest positions are across the board.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, James. Leoné, you've heard what James was saying. I think urgent implementation is the phrase here. And from an IPP's perspective, what is the first and most urgent deliverable that you need to see from this renewed partnership focus to unblock a grid connection or a project today?
I think, unfortunately, grid is going to be obviously everybody's top topic to talk about. But what I would like to maybe also stress, what James just mentioned, is the implementation part of it all, because I think everybody knows exactly what needs to be done and what the requirements are. Everybody also realizes what the pipeline has available to put back into the grid and actually what we have available to build. We do know what Eskom has available in their storeroom for implementation regarding resources. And what James also mentioned now is, how are we going to get there? And the different lenses is a very good approach, James. And I do believe that at the end of the day, even though we all look at through the different lenses, we all want the best for the country and the whole of South Africa. And in the end, we are all a big team that wants to reach that. And I think the best way, or the easiest way for us from an IPP perspective, and even for Olga and all of them, is for all of us to work together and not see each other as rivals, because in the end we are not. There's a big enough cake for all of us here, but for the better of the whole country. And I think we should work together and not see each other as rivals. We really should just work together. There is a plan, there is a way to get there. Let's take hands and move forward.
Thank you. Olga, you've heard what Leoné is saying. It's about working together. But let's talk about the independence of the grid. This is what James was saying, and by extension, the independence of the NTCSA. And given your warnings about tariff structures, what is the key design principle this new market must get right from day one to avoid entrenching incumbents?
Level playing field is a very important concept, and this is really the cornerstone of any liberalized market. So we've been raising and flagging this, obviously, but it goes without saying. Really, there's no point stating the obvious. Eskom unbundling is important because it is a way to create that level playing field, and level playing field where everyone is playing by the same rules is critical, because that creates ultimately, transparency, that creates, trust, that creates confidence ultimately. right? And this is, I think, that goes back to my previous point. You know, if you want to see investment, if we want to see investments flowing into our energy sector, we need to ensure that these things are there, right? So from a market perspective, you know, ultimately, we all know that, you know, market will be phased in. You know, there will be phases, and different parties will be allowed to participate at different times, and that is fine. As long as along the process we're building that trust, and I think that, yeah, so what James was mentioning, we need to ultimately create a level playing field.
All right. Thank you. André, let me come to you. Based on what Olga had just said, what would a clear roadmap for unbundling and market launch actually need to contain to give them the confidence to sign a major deal in 2026? That is your corporate clients and your clients, so to speak. What is it that they would need as a clear roadmap?
It's a good question. I think it's as much a roadmap and a plan as it is a period of stability to some degree as well. It's amazing what is going on in this particular space around, you know, different rules coming out, different signals. You know, last year we saw the RTP. You know, now it's traded rules, now it's grid access. You know, and there's a lot of activity in the market, and often, you know, too much choice and too much uncertainty leads to decision paralysis, which is bad in this case. So I think that is definitely from a corporate client point of view. You know, I think we have to go through this period now of where we're figuring everything out and making sure that it settles into a very sustainable space. But that, to me, I think the you know, the issues of conflict, issues of uncertainty definitely slow things down. I think what will give people, I think, a lot more confident is definitely the rollout of SAWEM. Really on that, I think, you know, often the issues of you know, renewable or other energy on this, flexibility remains a key factor. And that market, whether or not it injects liquidity or it increases flexibility and improves competition, is going to be, I think, a very, very wonderful impact on the market. And I think we should continue with it, accelerate it.
Thank you. Nontokozo, I'm going to circle back to you just, you know, to wrap up this particular discussion on this particular issue. Now, from inside Eskom, what is the single most important element that needs to be clarified in that roadmap that I just talked about with André, to make this reform both credible and executable in 2026?
And it is something that we have been vocal about it. It's really for us as Eskom as well. We want that certainty around the rules of the reform, which will help everyone that is part of it to be clear on the rules. Because if the rules are not clear, they do also have that effect on the certainty and the investments. Investments for all other parties, for us as Eskom, for the IPPs and everyone that is involved, of what are the rules? How do you deal with the legacy projects? How do you deal with the IPPs that were procured through Section 34 and all of that? So the trading rules, it has been something that we are saying definitely it's critical for all players, not just for Eskom. I have indeed, we've spoken quite a lot around the grid ownership and where it falls and the independence and thereof. Certainty, definitely, it's something that is required. Independence, we must also, in the discussion, bring in, because Eskom does not regulate itself. There are a number of regulators in the country that can also help us to resolve the issue of independence that we are talking about, we are talking about here and also outside of here. We have NERSA. Let's zoom into that and see if they will give us that certainty around the independence in terms of grid access and planning. We have Competition Commission. who also plays quite a critical role in the independence, in the fairness in terms of the market. But definitely the rules, and it all boils down, I think it was Olga who mentioned it. It's not for us here, it is for South Africa. The energy security, the affordability, and the sustainability. So we're not just fighting for our own pieces, but after all it's said and done, how do we secure the energy security, especially from where we come from? What is the role of Eskom in ensuring that security, but also making sure in the affordability and sustainability and all other players at play. But I'm encouraged that the discussions are collaboration. We all see ourselves as one big team. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim, I think we are nearing the close of our discussion. But let's get a quick priority, from each of you in respect of this performance. Sorry.
Can I pick up on a common theme from the kind of speakers on trust? Because I think as South Africans, we've been through a lot, and you can't wish for a better past, so it is what it is. But moving forward, I think it's very important how we think about trust and confidence in this fast-moving reform space.
Yes.
And really, to create that now going forward, we are seeing the green shoots. There's good news coming through on the economy, but we're not seeing it convert into investment and jobs. So that is a concern. But transparency, competence, credibility, communication, these are the things that over time is going to create sort of trust and confidence that private sector investors, business, etc., will say, we can invest in this economy, we can invest in this sector. That is going to take time. And now in this implementation phase, as we can hear, it is super complicated. And we haven't touched on the other sort of really important issues. We've got 8 gigawatts of coal stations that have illegal permitting positions by March 2030. Though that is a huge complexity that needs to be dealt with. And I'm not even talking about a climate change agenda. I'm talking about direct air quality permitting. IRP says we need a lot more balancing. Eskom have said they're currently facing nearly a 4 gigawatt daily swing. By 2027, in 2 years' time, they're saying that will be 8 gigawatts from midday sort of trough to evening peak. They don't have the flexibility. They're thinking, how can we make coal more flexible? What can we do? We're not building batteries fast enough. We don't have the right price signals coming from the market because the market's not launched. I love André's enthusiasm about the second year, but actually we don't even have the first year because the market's not there. And I think that there's battles at the moment with getting the readiness and the positions and the approvals. I think the soft market launch is going to be delayed, and there will be an announcement on that. So there is a lot of things that are moving parts. And I think the point that André makes around stability, we need to embed what we've got. We've got all the rules have been done on traders, on allocation, on wheeling, on net billing. There's a lot of work that has been done in these phases. We need to embed that now, get that working. If we can release grid, investors will come. Investors are super confident. They know that we've got to move in this direction. And there is this growing confidence that we are getting the structures and the working together. So I think we must be careful, and listeners and readers must be discerning around sort of mistaking the end game versus what is urgent that we need to do now. And I think, a lot of us have said this. We need to build confidence, a lot more transparency. We've got to get into the implementation detail. We need stability, but most important, we must release grid. Our target is said, we've got to release 5 gigs of grid this year, and it must be allocated so that financial close process and the bankers are having sleepless nights again by the end of this year. Because if we don't have that, we put the investment cycles, the industry growth, and the sector at risk. By the time we get to 2029, we will be in a crisis again. So those would be some points I think are just important to indent. Thanks.
We'll be back to it. Thank you so much, James. Like I indicated earlier, I think we're running out of time. But I want us to touch on something very quickly, and I'm going to start with you, James. what is one tangible, achievable outcome that you would say when you get to the end of 2026, say 2026 was a decisive year for energy reform? What would that tangible, achievable outcome be? I'm not talking about process, but a result. Let me start with you, James, and then Olga.
Leoné. Number one is grid. We need physical release of capacity. I think that can be done through adjusting curtailment as well as a relook at the methodology of how grid is allocated or modeled in the network and the GCCA. We need that to be released, and with that is the confidence and transparency of applying now the rules that have been agreed, seeing that transparency of grid queuing data, of the grid, the GCAR queuing data, as well as the actual network data. So how much capacity is at a node in the network, what's available, as well as who's queuing for it, and therefore, how do we move into the financial close kind of enthusiasm? That, for me, I would say, if we could do that, we actually get everything else can kind of take some time, and it will take time, but we don't have time left on grid. We have to move with great urgency in 2026. Thanks.
Thanks. Olga, quickly. And then Leoné, André, Nontokozo, and we'll end with Nontokozo.
Well, reform. Look, reform is really as we've been discussing. It's across different, there are different ways that we see this reform unfolding. And ultimately, if depending on your look, you will see different important things. And we've been achieving a lot. I think to James's point, we've been achieving a lot. There's a lot of work that is being done. Different rules, different changes to existing documents. All this has very important consequences for the industry and for this whole reform track and liberalization of the sector. So from that perspective, we cannot really, say that we're not on track, right? But at the same time, there are certain things that definitely, from our perspective, for example, from an advisory perspective, the launch of SAWEM is still an important and critical milestone that we would like to see in this year. Even if it's limited to just a handful of participants, it still would be an important milestone. It would send the right messages. And most importantly, it would, we would start seeing some data that we, as industry participants, as stakeholders, we can start using in our analysis, in our projections. And really, this data ultimately is critical also for our clients, to start drafting their strategy, preparing for the changes that need to happen. Ultimately, everyone is trying to see where to take their business forward and how to do that in the most efficient manner. And that data ultimately is what we would like to start seeing.
Thank you. Leoné?
Thanks, Masedi. I think I'm going to focus on the answer of this question through my mini lens, and that would be the trust issue. And to get to the end of 2026, looking back, seeing that Eskom and the private sector is not a definite split in the middle anymore, and that people can really see that there's a collaboration effort between the two, and it's not the enemy on the one side and those trying to do the right thing on the other side. So in my opinion, the collaboration between the two and real trust being created.
Thank you. André?
Thanks, Masedi. So a little bit different take. I'm going to focus on access really on this. So currently the market is at 20% of its potential really on this. I'd love to see by the end of 2026 that number being a lot higher. It will enable, I think it'll enable multiple wonderful things. One, potentially more demand leading to more investment, but also, supporting or creating an ability or a process by which, generation could be separated, municipalities' revenue can be protected. Eskom is able to recoup its generation costs and help with that, with shortfalls within the municipalities. And customers actually get to have a choice of where they get their electricity. So I think that if we can take a 20% access to a 40 or 60 by the end of the year, and I'm very ambitious here, I think it'd be a massive win.
Thank you so much. Nontokozo?
Yeah, I share the same sentiments with most of the panelists. Definitely 2026, liberalized market, clearer on how they work, and even if it's a trial and error, we move along that same basis. Luckily for us as South Africa, the journey has been done somewhere. And it's a good thing that we are all walking the same journey. So definitely the liberalized market, but also the IRP was out, but the tangible movement on the implementation of that, we start seeing how the nuclear program is coming into play, the gas to power is coming to play, the studies are being done, and we are ready for the execution as led by the shareholder. So that is the tangible things, which will also give us confidence that we are matching the line of the energy plan of South Africa. Thank you. And definitely no Eskom or IPP, but the energy industry solving for one objective. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. James, let me circle back to you for final big picture question to you. Given the scale of change, and how do we balance the urgent short-term need to keep the lights on with the long-term imperative of building a modern, decarbonized system? Is this a trade-off, or can 2026 be the year we do both?
I mean, one of the things that we haven't touched on, but flows from the fact that we're now in implementation. And implementation we need to take the design, and we need to put it through rigorous risk, and resourcing assessments, and then look at capabilities. And this then talks to the issue of state institutions. And I think very particularly what we see is that NERSA has not been geared up to handle this level of complexity. We don't have the robustness of the regulatory oversight. But equally, I mean, we have a brand new ministry. They're dealing with huge complexity, covering a massive amount of ground without the appropriate levels of capacity and skills that should be expected. And I think even, and certainly in my experience, in Eskom, they've lost a lot of skills over the years. They're trying to rebuild. But again, no one has done this before in South Africa. We can look at international benchmarks and say, sure, that looks good. We take a portion of that, we learn, and we say, okay, we think this is what we have to do. But until you get on the ground and start implementing, we actually are all learning as we go. And when it comes to implementation, where we're coming from an integrated utility structure and more of a developmental state, moving towards private sector investment, liberalized market, we are at this stage, we do need capable state institutions. And that, I think, is an Achilles heel, which when it comes back to prioritization, we've got to do more with what we've got. There's a lot of work that's been done. And I think the points around stability, build trust, get the current rules worked out, get them implemented, but phase it. So we don't have to be perfect now. We can work towards an end game. We can phase it. We can work closer together to recognize what the kind of implications are. But we need stability in 26. And that means about kind of not losing the momentum that we've got, not losing the work that was done, embedding. And then, as I say, I think that we are missing the fact that the financial close process, the industry that is underpinned by investment confidence, that is on decline. That has huge implications down the line. We won't have enough energy. The industry's at risk. We're not growing the economy. And if we're going to create jobs and come back to a sort of 3 to 5% world that we all South Africans are committed to, we have to see electricity demand going up. Otherwise, we just won't have economic growth. So we have to gear up, I think, with a slightly different lenses. But I think, we've learned so much in the last 2 years of working this kind of crisis mode, 3 years actually, that we actually a lot closer. And we can see here immediately, we've got IPPs, investors, utilities, traders, organizations. We all actually are finding a lot of common ground quite quickly, even although we might have slightly differentiated views of the timing and how we would implement. That's fine, but we actually have a lot of common ground, and that's what we've got to focus on in 2026. Get that embedded. Yeah.
All right, absolutely. All right, now thank you all for a truly comprehensive discussion. I really appreciate it. From the utility control room to the corporate boardroom, you've highlighted both alignment and tension necessary to drive progress. And I think that brings us to the end of our discussion. I'm going to hand over to Shannon. Shannon?
Thanks so much, Masedi. Just before I do close the session, though, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A that I would like to give the panelists a chance to answer. So I'm just going to keep you all here for a little while longer. There's a nice one here for you, James. It's more a comment than a question, but it just says, Tiamo says, we should appoint you, James, as the godfather of this reform. So take that for what you will. He says you've done all the work, so well done. But going back to the questions, there's one specifically here. It is from an anonymous attendee, but it is to Olga and André. And they're asking how you see Eskom's retail tariff plan affecting the attractiveness of wheeling for C&I customers, especially if the fixed component increases further. Olga, would you like to take that one?
Yes, definitely. Thank you for this one. It is an important discussion, all the changes that are taking place in the retail tariff plan. And indeed, this whole shift between fixed and variable components is a very significant impact. And our analysis shows that it very much depends on individual company. It depends on their profile. And we have seen clients who have suffered and quite a bit from the changes that have already been approved. And we have seen others who have actually flourished and gained from those changes. So ultimately, it's not black or white. It depends. You have to do your analysis at the end of the day. We are quite certain within Cresco that the changes will continue. They have to, one way or another. And again, you have to analyze, you have to adjust. And that's why I guess refers back to my previous point. Data is important because it opens up opportunities to do the analysis, and that analysis then feeds into the strategy and adjustment, and really it just allows us to move forward.
Great, thank you, Olga. André, anything from your side?
Sure. So I think it's an important question. I think it's a question a lot of people are asking on that. So the RTP, we saw already an increase in fixed costs and lowering in variable, and the question is how far that'll go. I think knowing where it will settle is a little bit, no one really knows about that. One thing that is clear though, especially in my mind around that, is there needs to be appropriate compensation for fixed costs. The word appropriate is what we need to define on this, because that I think is where the tension lies. If it is excessive, then the market signals for building new generation without the alternative revenue streams disappears. If it is too small from a fixed point of view, then James' earlier point, sustainability of Eskom does not get adequately compensated for its role as a stakeholder on this. So defining that optimal balance is key. We've got a lot of international benchmarking experience here, and Olga could give you a lot of information probably on that in terms of where these sort of end up. So as long as we don't become a terrible outlier within that, I think there's a sustainable space in that makes a business case for renewables and an appropriate compensation for the balancing party.
Thanks, André. Thanks for your insight. I'll take one more question. It says here, as reforms take longer and become more complex, how can the energy sector communicate progress in a way that avoids fatigue while maintaining momentum? Maybe you can take that one, James.
Yeah, I don't know if there is a silver bullet for that, because I think it goes to the heart of what a lot of what we've been speaking about. The one thing I think which is important, maybe just for everyone on the call, is that we have a little bit of often a perception that government is oblivious to this and they're not listening, and they kind of buried somewhere in politics, eating KFC. I think it can't be further from the truth. I think that it's a new ministry, and certainly I'm not talking on behalf of the ministry or the minister, But you know, at the president's engagement last night, I mean, the minister sort of ran through 13 key items that he felt we've got to deal with, and this covers, you know, from the transmission and ITPs, the IRP, scenario planning, risk adjustments and updates, how we're going to be more agile and stay on top of that. All of these rules-based issues, wheeling, you know, so the pricing policy update, that is now a major priority, considering the issues around FBE and the smelter NPA or pricing agreements which have been proposed. This is a lot of hard and complex work. The ministry is working on this. They're trying to engage with NERSA. They're busy trying to upgrade their capacity and capability. They're doing an organizational design review. They're doing that with NERSA. NERSA is going to do a regulatory benchmarking trip to the UK in February. These entities are aware of the issues and the complexities. They are working very hard to do that. That doesn't necessarily always mean that they're good at it, or they are fully capacitated, or that they communicated well. But I think there is very much a commitment to say we all need to engage. We do need transparency. We recognize the importance of that engagement. So that, you know, I think that the theme of what has been in this conversation, certainly like Leoné and Nontokozo said, you know, we need to consider this as it's an energy complex. How do we work as an energy complex, rather than seeing disparate groups of government and politics versus a utility versus private sector investors or IPPs? That will take time. I think we're going in the right direction. And certainly the right things are committed and being done, but it's not that easy to get the runs on the board and always for everyone to say, I'm comfortable that I have access, I'm being heard, and I'm seeing results. But that will take time. So we've got to stay at the table, and we've got to keep working at it. I think there's no shortcut to that, unfortunately. But yeah, good point raised on that one, Shannon.
Well, thank you so much for all of your insights. I am aware of the time, so I think we won't keep you much longer. Thank you to everyone who participated in that Q&A. So that does bring us to the end of today's discussion. A big thank you to our facilitator, Masedi Tlhong from TGR Attorneys Incorporated, for his great facilitation, and to our panelists, Nontokozo Hadebe from Eskom Holdings, Leoné Human from the South African Independent Power Producers Association, James Mackay from the Energy Council of South Africa, André Nepgen from Discovery Green, and Olga Suchkova from Cresco for sharing their insights, and of course to all of our attendees for joining us and contributing through your questions and comments. We'd also like to once again thank our sponsors, Discovery Green, Standard Bank, Investec, WEG, and TGR Attorneys for making this webinar possible. The recording of today's session will be shared soon, so keep an eye out for that email. And today's webinar was the first of our two-part series of webinars on South Africa's energy outlook for 2026. So please join us for the second part of the series on the 3rd of February at 2 p.m. It will feature a practical discussion on South Africa's electricity transmission grid. You'll find the registration link in the chat. If you'd like to stay up to date with our upcoming webinars and news, be sure to sign up for our free daily newsletter or visit our website. You can also reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. From all of us at Creamer Media Webinars, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.